The lawyer's office was silent except for the faint ticking of a brass clock mounted above the mahogany bookshelf. Outside, the rain had been falling for hours, soft, rhythmic, relentless. Inside, three siblings sat across from each other, their eyes fixed on a single envelope resting between them. No one dared to speak. No one moved. The tension in that room was almost physical, pressing against the air like an invisible weight. For 15 minutes, they had been waiting for the attorney to return with the final documents. The estate of their late father, Harold Whitmore, was valued at just over $5 million. A sprawling property in rural Vermont, shares in an old lumber company, and a lifetime of savings meticulously accounted for. But none of it mattered, not yet. Because before the money, before the signatures, there was something else, something Harold had left behind that would turn their world into a battlefield. The eldest son, Richard, adjusted his cufflinks, the gold ones his father used to wear. Across from him, his younger sister, Evelyn, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red but dry. The youngest, Daniel, sat closest to the window, the dim light carving out sharp angles across his face. They were all grieving, or at least pretending to. The funeral had been 2 weeks earlier, and the small New England town still whispered about how close the Whitmores used to be. But whispers, like money, have a way of changing shape when truth starts to surface. The door opened quietly. Attorney Robert Lang stepped back into the room, his expression unreadable. He held the final will in one hand, sealed in cream-colored paper. "I appreciate your patience," he said, voice steady, professional. "Before we proceed, your father requested that I read something aloud." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Richard leaned back, feigning calm. Daniel didn't move at all. Robert opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, trembling lines of ink that had been written, according to the date, 2 days before Harold's death. "To my children," the letter began. "What I built was meant to unite you, but I've learned too late that wealth does not bind, it divides. I have made decisions that you may not understand. But the truth must be known before this inheritance destroys what remains of our family. By the time you hear this, everything will have been set in motion. You will each receive your share, but not without confronting what was hidden. One of you already knows what that means." Robert paused. The room was so quiet that even the ticking clock seemed to have stopped. Richard's jaw tightened. Evelyn whispered, "What does that mean?" Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at the window again, his reflection caught in the glass like a ghost. What no one knew then was that this letter wasn't just a farewell, it was a confession. One that would expose everything Harold had done to protect a secret buried decades earlier. Before we go deeper into this chilling case, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments. And as the details unfold, tell us, do you believe this was an act of greed, betrayal, or something darker? Also, if you're drawn to haunting mysteries like this one, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us keep these secrets exposed and bring you more stories that the world should never forget. The Whitmore estate sat on 80 acres of land near the edge of Maple Hollow, a quiet town where winters came early and stayed too long. The family had lived there for 3 generations. Harold had inherited both land and reputation, known as a man of precision, discipline, and secrecy. The locals respected him, but few truly knew him. He had built his fortune through timber and property development, And though the world outside the hollow changed rapidly, the Whitmore house remained frozen in time. Richard had followed in his father's footsteps, a corporate executive based in Boston, ambitious and exacting. Evelyn, the middle child, stayed close to home, caring for their father in his final years and running a small art studio downtown. Daniel, the youngest, had always been the outlier, the dreamer who left for Los Angeles to chase a music career that never quite took off. When Harold died suddenly of a heart condition, Daniel was the last to arrive and the least expected to return. But something about Harold's death didn't sit right with Evelyn. The doctors called it natural causes, yet Harold had been scheduled for a full cardiac evaluation the following week. He had been healthy, too healthy. And then there was the matter of the missing folder, the one labeled Beneficiary Update 2. She had seen it on his desk the day before he died. Afterward, it was gone. 2 weeks passed before the will reading. The family gathered under one roof again for the first time in years. What began as polite distance quickly turned to tension. Conversations lingered on who had spent more time with Harold, who knew his business best, who had earned his trust. But behind the careful smiles, suspicions grew. Evelyn noticed that Richard seemed overly confident about how the assets would be split. He spoke to the lawyer privately before the official meeting and seemed to know more than he should. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed quiet, observing, withdrawn, and if he knew something no one else did. The night before the will reading, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She wandered into her father's study, the scent of old paper and cedar still heavy in the air. She opened the drawer where he kept his letters and found one addressed to someone named Margaret Hale. The handwriting was unmistakably Harold's. But the letter wasn't about business, it was personal, intimate. It mentioned a child Harold claimed to have supported in secret. Evelyn froze. She read it twice, then 3 times. The letter dated back to 1987, 35 years ago. "You'll never be forgotten," it said. "I will take care of you in every way I can. You'll always have what's yours, even if the world never knows." When she heard footsteps in the hallway, Evelyn quickly folded the letter and hid it under a book. It was Richard. "Can't sleep?" he asked. His voice was calm but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Just remembering Dad." He nodded, lingered a second too long, then turned away. She waited until he was gone, then retrieved the letter again. That night she barely slept. By the next morning the letter was gone. When the will was finally read and Harold's final words filled the air, Evelyn knew the message wasn't meant for all of them. It was meant for one. Someone who had been living with the truth all along. Someone who had everything to lose if that truth was exposed. The document divided the estate into 3 portions, but with one unusual clause: a trustee reassessment period of 90 days. During that time, all beneficiaries were required to remain in Maple Hollow to assist with the transfer of assets. Any refusal or early departure would result in forfeiture. It was a condition that forced them to stay together longer than any of them wanted. And as days turned into weeks, the fragile surface of civility began to crack. In the evenings, Evelyn walked the estate grounds alone, feeling watched. Once, she swore she saw a light flicker in Harold's old workshop long after midnight. Another night, she found the study door unlocked despite always double-checking it. Richard grew irritable, snapping at both Daniel and the lawyer. And Daniel, He seemed restless, always pacing, always on the phone. Then came the package. Delivered anonymously to the Whitmore residence, it contained a single photograph. A baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, beside a woman whose face had been partially torn from the print. On the back was a handwritten note. The truth belongs to those who seek it. Evelyn recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her father's. Evelyn stood in the hallway, the photograph trembling in her hands. Rain lashed against the windows again, as if the world outside had chosen to echo the turmoil inside that house. The baby's blue blanket, the torn photograph, her father's unmistakable handwriting, it all converged into one impossible thought. Harold Whitmore, the man who raised 3 children under the image of discipline and control, had lived a second life. But who was the child in the picture? And why send this now, weeks after his death? That evening, Evelyn confronted her brothers. The family gathered in the living room, the air thick with accusation. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across their faces. She placed the photograph on the coffee table. "Does this mean anything to either of you?" she asked quietly. Richard didn't even glance at it. Dad handled a lot of business over the years. Maybe it's from some charity or... "It's not charity," Evelyn interrupted. "He wrote on the back. That's his handwriting." Daniel leaned forward, studying the photo. His expression flickered, something between recognition and fear, but then it was gone. "It's probably nothing," he muttered. Evelyn caught the change, subtle but unmistakable. "You've seen this before," she said. Daniel hesitated. "I said it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and the next morning, the real unraveling began. At dawn, Evelyn received a message from an unknown number. It contained a scanned copy of a birth certificate issued in Vermont, 1988. The name Thomas Hale, mother Margaret Hale, father Harold Whitmore. She dropped her phone, heart pounding. The dates aligned perfectly. Harold had been married to their mother, Eleanor, at that time. The certificate meant only one thing. They had a half-brother, and someone wanted them to know. Evelyn called the local records office, confirming that the document was genuine. She then reached out to Attorney Lang, who, after an uncomfortable pause, admitted that he had once been instructed to prepare a secondary trust on Harold's behalf. "He canceled it a year ago," Lang said, "but it was meant for someone named Thomas Hale." Richard's temper exploded when he heard. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Dad would never..." But he stopped himself. His voice cracked. That afternoon, Evelyn searched Harold's old study again. Behind a row of dusty ledgers, she found an old lockbox. Inside were deposit slips, all made to an account under the name T. Hale. The last deposit had been made 6 months before Harold's death. The account totaled over $1.2 million. When she showed Daniel, his reaction wasn't shock, it was dread. "Evelyn, stop digging," he whispered. "You don't know what you're getting into." "What do you mean?" she demanded. Daniel didn't answer. He walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the discovery. That night, Evelyn went to the local inn where Daniel had been staying since the will reading. His car was gone. His room, emptied. Only a single note was left behind on the desk. Some secrets should have stayed buried. The next morning, Attorney Lang contacted Evelyn. "There's been a development," he said. "Richard wants to amend the estate process. He's claiming Daniel signed an early withdrawal document, disqualifying himself from the inheritance." Evelyn froze. "That's impossible." Daniel left last night. Lang sighed. Then someone forged his signature. Evelyn drove to Richard's hotel suite that afternoon. He was calm, too calm, sitting by the window, and he watched the rain roll down the glass like nothing was wrong. "You've gone too far," she said. "You know Dad was hiding another child." Richard's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You think that changes anything? If he had another son, he should have said it while he was alive. I built this family's name. I ran the business. You think I'm giving half of that to some stranger?" "You forged Daniel's signature," she said. He didn't deny it. "I did what I had to. You think Dad's little secrets make you righteous? He spent his life cleaning up messes, this one included." Evelyn stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Richard turned toward her, eyes cold. "You really don't remember Margaret Hale, do you? She wasn't just some mistress. She worked for him, at the mill. She was 17. The words landed like a blade. Evelyn stumbled back. "That's not true." Richard's voice dropped. "You think I'm lying? Ask Daniel." She stared at him, stunned. "What does Daniel have to do with this?" Richard didn't answer. He turned back to the window. "You'll find out soon enough. If you keep digging, you'll destroy more than you think." Evelyn left shaking, mind spinning. Could her father, the man she had cared for in his final days, have carried a crime that dark? And what did Daniel know? That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn called the number that had sent her the birth certificate. A woman answered. Her voice was frail but steady. "I've been waiting for this call," she said. "My name is Margaret Hale." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Why now?" she asked. "Because your father promised he'd make things right before he died," Margaret said. "But he didn't, so I had to." She hesitated, then added softly, "Thomas is gone. He died last year. But the money kept coming. Until Harold's death." Evelyn's breath caught. "Gone, you mean?" "Car accident," Margaret said. "Upstate New York. No foul play, just bad timing. But I think your father's death wasn't what it looked like either." Evelyn gripped the phone tighter. "Why do you say that?" "Because Harold called me 2 nights before he died," Margaret whispered. "He said someone had been threatening him. Said if the truth ever got out, the family would be destroyed." The line went dead. The next morning, police cars appeared at the estate. Daniel had been found in his car near the Vermont border. Alive, but unconscious from what looked like an overdose. In his glove compartment, officers found several documents, copies of Harold's letters, financial statements, and one sealed envelope addressed to Evelyn. When she opened it, she found a confession written in Harold's own hand. "Daniel is not your brother. He is Thomas Hale." Her heart stopped. Harold had taken the boy in decades earlier, giving him a new name, a new life, and erasing the past to protect him from scandal. Eleanor, their mother, had known but agreed to raise him as her own under one condition, that Harold never speak of Margaret again. But someone had discovered the truth before Harold died, and now that secret was tearing the family apart. When Daniel finally woke in the hospital, he refused to speak. Detectives questioned him, but he stayed silent. Only Evelyn was allowed in. She sat beside his bed, clutching the confession. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't know until last year. He told me everything. He said he wanted to fix it, but Richard found out first." Richard? Daniel nodded weakly. Dad called me the night before he died. He said Richard confronted him, said he'd go public, ruin the family name. Dad was scared. Next morning, he was gone. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. When police questioned Richard, he denied everything, claimed Harold's heart condition was documented and that he'd never argued with him that night. But when investigators subpoenaed Harold's phone records, they found a 3-minute call made from Richard's number at 11:42 p.m., the night Harold died. Richard's alibi collapsed. The investigation intensified. Forensic specialists confirmed Harold's medication had been tampered with. Lethal levels of digitalis, a drug used for heart conditions, but deadly in excess. The bottle in Harold's drawer had been refilled just a day before his death. Fingerprints, only Harold's. But the refill order came from a pharmacy account linked to a company Richard owned. Reports suggest the DA considered manslaughter charges, but there was no direct evidence of administration. Still, the damage was done. The business crumbled, investors fled, and the Whitmore legacy imploded in public scandal. The truth had been exposed, but not in the way Harold intended. Evelyn sold the estate within the year. Daniel disappeared again, leaving no forwarding address. Some said he returned to Los Angeles. Others claimed he moved west under a new name. Richard was never convicted, but he lost everything: his company, his reputation, and whatever family he had left. In the end, the Whitmore fortune dissolved into lawyers' fees, unpaid taxes, and silence. But one rumor never faded, that Harold's last confession, the one Evelyn found, wasn't the only letter he wrote. There was another, still missing. And according to some, it contained the name of the person who truly caused his death. Weeks after the scandal broke, Maple Hollow felt like a ghost town. The Whitmore mansion stood empty, its tall windows boarded, its gardens overgrown. Locals passed by in silence, glancing toward the iron gates where once generations of the Whitmore family had entered with pride. Now it was a landmark of shame, the kind of place parents used to warn their children about. Evelyn remained in town. She rented a small apartment near the edge of the old mill, still trying to piece together the fragments of her family's downfall. The town had turned cold to her, some out of pity, others out of curiosity. She could feel the stares in grocery stores, the whispers that followed her name. At night, she went through her father's letters over and over again, looking for anything that might point to the missing note. The investigators had closed the case as death by cardiac failure, precipitated by digitalis overdose. There was not enough proof to charge Richard, and Daniel, if he was even still alive, had vanished. But Evelyn couldn't let go of one detail: the envelope Harold had left for whoever seeks the truth. She was certain it existed. One late evening, while sorting through the last of the estate papers, she found something she'd never noticed before: a small brass key taped under Harold's desk drawer. The engraving read Cottage 3. Her heart pounded. Cottage 3 was the oldest building on the property, once used by caretakers decades ago. She hadn't been there since she was a child. The next morning, Evelyn drove back to the estate. The autumn air was crisp, the trees stripped bare, their branches like black veins against a gray sampa. The cottage door creaked as she pushed it open. Dust floated through beams of morning light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. There was nothing at first, just boxes, old furniture, and the ghost of a family that once seemed unbreakable. Then she saw it, a locked cabinet beside the fireplace. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside were three items: Harold's old wristwatch, a sealed envelope, and a cassette tape labeled "For Evelyn." Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside, another handwritten letter. "If you're reading this, Evelyn, it means you've chosen to know everything. I'm sorry. I tried to protect all of you from what I did, but truth doesn't stay buried. Richard found out about Daniel, about Thomas. He came to me that night, furious. I told him I was rewriting the will, giving part of the estate to Daniel. He said he wouldn't allow it. I thought I could reason with him, but I was wrong. When I felt my chest tightening, I knew what was happening. He didn't mean to kill me, I think, but he took the truth and turned it into a weapon. He believed the family name mattered more than life itself. There's something else you must know. Daniel wasn't the only secret I kept. Your mother, Eleanor, knew about Margaret from the beginning, but she also knew something about you. When you were born, the doctors said you might not survive. The child listed on your birth certificate isn't the one buried in that grave marked Eleanor's daughter. That grave belongs to your twin." Evelyn froze, the letter slipping from her hands. The words blurred. Her twin? A twin sister she had never known existed? She read on, trembling. "Eleanor couldn't bear the loss, so I agreed to change the records. We raised you as our only child, and she spent the rest of her life pretending the other never existed. I tried to make amends by caring for Daniel, but in doing so I only repeated the lie. I buried one truth beneath another until the weight of them all became too heavy." Her breath hitched. She reached for the cassette player on the table, blew the dust off, and pressed play. For a moment there was only static. Then Harold's voice filled the small room, weak, weary, unmistakably his. "If you've come this far, I need you to do something for me. Find your brother. He's innocent of my death, no matter what the world says. And forgive Richard, even if he can't forgive himself. Tell them both the truth, every part of it. I don't want the Whitmore name remembered for wealth or deceit. I want it remembered for the chance to change, even after it's too late." The tape ended. Evelyn sat there for a long time, listening to the silence that followed. By the time she drove back into town, the sun had already set. She called Detective Monroe, the lead investigator on her father's case, and turned over the letter and tape. A week later, Monroe reopened the inquiry. The tape was authenticated. The handwriting matched Harold's. Authorities issued a warrant for Richard Whitmore's arrest, but when they arrived at his condominium in Boston, he was gone. The neighbors hadn't seen him in days. His car was missing. On the kitchen counter, they found his passport, his phone, and a note scrawled on a legal pad. "Some things should stay buried." His body was never found. Months passed. The estate was auctioned, the land sold to developers, and the Whitmore name faded into local legend. Reporters wrote articles calling it the Whitmore curse. The public debated what was truth and what was fabrication. But Evelyn knew one thing with certainty: there was no curse. There was only the cost of secrets, layered so deeply that even the dead couldn't keep them. She moved to Portland, Oregon, started a new life, and rarely spoke of her family again. But every year on the anniversary of her father's death, she drove north to Vermont and placed 3 roses at the gate of the old estate, one for Harold, one for Daniel, and one for the twin she never met. Some nights, she swore she saw a figure standing by the trees, a man in a dark coat, watching quietly, as if keeping a promise he never got to fulfill. Whether it was Daniel or a ghost of her own guilt, she never knew, because some truths, once exposed, never truly rest. And somewhere out there, another letter might still exist. One that tells the part of the story none of them were ready to face. Sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones we keep from the people we love. And in this case, the truth was exposed, but the damage was already done. Do you think justice was truly served? Or are there still secrets left buried? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you want us to continue exposing the world's darkest family secrets and betrayals, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story we bring to light.